Welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at MarketSurge.
Hello and welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jeremy Foote. Dr. Jeremy Foote is an assistant professor in the Brian Lamb School of Communication at Purdue University and a core member of the Community Data Science Collective. As a computational social scientist, his research focuses on the dynamics of online communities, exploring how they form, work, grow, and sustain cooperation. Utilizing large-scale data analysis, simulations, and social network analysis, Dr. Foote investigates the factors that influence collective behavior and knowledge construction in digital spaces. With a PhD in Media, Technology, and Society from Northwestern University, Dr. Foote has contributed to understanding the interplay between technology and social organization. His work provides valuable insights into how digital platforms can foster meaningful collaboration and community building. Welcome, and I know you as Jeremy, so I'm going to refer to you as Jeremy, but I'm really glad to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here. And I guess that's okay.
I appreciate it. And as Jeremy and I have known each other for over a decade now, maybe like 15 years, and Jeremy probably would love a caveat that he is not a business marketer, and he's going to say that will make his knowledge not applicable, but I will argue with him and say that I think it is extremely applicable, the science of networks and social organization, because in the sales world, in the marketing world, we do need to warm up our connections in order to do business transactions and build trust. So, Jeremy, tell us a little bit about your work and your background, maybe at a high level. What do you focus on, and what would be a good background? Any insights in addition to what I shared?
Yeah, thanks, Reed. So I'll start with that. I am an academic. I am a nerd. I am really interested in understanding kind of the theories and the concepts. In fact, I worked for a little while after my bachelor's degree for a startup. I was a product manager. I was bad at it. I'm much more comfortable, with my head in the clouds, in the ivory tower, as they say, and thinking about sort of the theoretical versions. That being said, I do care about the practical implications of my work. So I think your introduction was good. I've focused a lot of my research on understanding online collaboration, so that's things like wikis, as well as like new and emerging things. A lot of my dissertation work was on looking at like what predicts that a new wiki would be successful, which sounds like it doesn't apply much to business, but the argument, at least that I made, I used a lot of concepts from the organization literature, is that these are small organizations. Like when we think about startups, it's really hard. You never get the chance to look at a startup when it's, an idea, but wikis really, we have data from the very beginning, the very first edit, and so we can kind of track how they progress. And so recently I've moved a little bit more to online communities. Reddit in particular is where a lot of my work is. And I've been doing some stuff with AI, like looking at how AI might help to, for example, help people who have behaved badly on Reddit to think about and reflect on their behavior, etc. So some stuff in kind of moderation and some stuff in AI simulations, and then a lot on sort of how people perceive their online world and interact with it.
Okay, super interesting, and I think we'll touch on many of those points as we go. Now, for context, one approach that many businesses take is they try to construct a community that's around their business service or their business offering. Now, an example, my wife Liz, who runs a photography studio, she has a very active Facebook group. It's called the VIP Group for Empowered Women of Chicago. And in that group, she posts thought-sparking conversation questions. She interviews other entrepreneurs in the group and whatnot. And I think for her own fulfillment, I think she really enjoys the engagement. But it also has been a channel so she's built some trust and brought people in for photo shoots that only knew her from the group. And so just giving that as context is why a business might care about community building. Tell us a little bit about like these successful online communities, how they have grown, and like how's one successful, others are not. What do you observe that are some of the commonalities between those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think maybe an important point is that the people have sometimes they call it uses and gratifications theory. Like for any technology, including going on the internet, people sort of often have in mind the things they want to get from it, and that different communities are good for different things. And so a lot of the communities I've studied are really about conversation, sharing things like on Reddit, and are less focused on business things in particular. And I guess one of the important things we found for something being successful is just having someone, a founder especially, who is committed to it. One of the universal laws of online collaboration is that there's almost always this kind of really steep drop off in participation for any group. That there are many people who participate, sometimes we might call them lurkers, or even among those who participate peripherally. They will make one comment and then never be seen again, while there are a few people who participate a lot. And it's kind of an iron law. Wherever you look, you see that from very small communities to very big ones. And so having someone who's at kind of that far end, who's willing to kind of create content and create engagement, which it sounds like Liz does, is really important for sustaining the group and kind of creating a critical mass of people that can continue it.
Okay, so you touched on some interesting things, and by the way, I think like a business could potentially start a subreddit, that's adjacent to their business. Now, the founder being super active, does it matter? I mean, I'm going to assume that if they come in with an agenda, like if they come in saying, this is a subreddit all about my business. I mean, it seems kind of strange that I don't know. The expectation doesn't seem fair that you'd get a lot of engagement.
Yes. I mean, there are risks. And maybe that's a larger point that's worth considering is that like authenticity is really important and like maybe like there are risks. So I'll give an example. There are few subreddits, and again, I wish I had the details of an example, but I know of a few contexts where a subreddit is sort of there's corporate people who are running the subreddit and are eliminating all of the negative things that people say and just really being heavy-handed in the way they're moderating it. And often what will happen instead is that people will move the conversation somewhere else, right? So instead of you getting the chance to to have a resource, now all the users are, on a different subreddit where you are no longer the moderator and you can't control the conversation. I think that is an important, difficult thing for people, but it's that if you want to have online communities, you have to let go of a lot of control. That's one thing that people really dislike. I mean, obviously there's some types of thing, don't allow people to, use profanity or whatever rules you have, but rules that are like, you can only say nice things about my company are ones that will drive people away. And I think that often engaging, like being willing to engage in good faith and et cetera, are the things that kind of can make this work, and being like heavy-handed and trying to remove criticism is something that will often backfire.
Yeah, and that makes me think even about like ads like I see on social media as I'm scrolling through, and the comment section often will be like, so it's like talking about like auto repair place or something, and then it's got a spokeswoman, and then all the comments are, "What's her at?" And rather than anything relevant. So I'm sure there's a fine line to handling this, and so you have like rules of behavior, but not necessarily just blanket eliminate all negativity.
Yeah, I think that's right. And some of this is like figuring out probably, I mean, again, this is really just speaking out of nowhere because from a business perspective, I just haven't thought about it from that perspective before.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But like my guess is, thinking about why people are coming and what you can offer. And so, often people come to Reddit, for example, looking for expertise and trying to answer their questions. And so, if you can be a source of expertise, like that can be helpful. Yeah.
What about if there's a community you're trying to build, would you want to allow competing experts into that space that might have a different perspective or a different motive? How would you handle that? I think a business owner could really deal with that. Like a competitor gets in there and they'll start promoting their business. How do you think that
That is a
could
fantastic
be?
question. My colleague Nate Tablantis and some folks that he's worked with studied subreddits and the ways that they compete or not with each other. And as far as attention goes, there's actually very little competition. And in fact, it's sort of like a rising tide lifts all ships. If there's more attention to this topic, then all of the subreddits on that topic get more attention and engagement. And so from that perspective, someone else creating another subreddit or another community that some of your competitors even can create another community may actually be beneficial for you because it might raise interest in the topic at large.
Okay, so that's really fascinating, and it takes me to another question. So these platforms, they have algorithms, and they make decisions about what content gets promoted and what is suppressed or ignored. So, you look at, I mean, I obviously don't want to go down the politics route, but it's clear that the platforms do influence what political speech gets promoted or not. But like in a business context, it's like, I'm not sure how they handle that. But also, are there general principles for considering an algorithm? Like maybe should I make a decision of whether I should try to build a community on Reddit, on YouTube, or Facebook? What kinds of considerations would you incorporate in that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought too much about this, but the one thing that comes to mind is that, like many aspects of the social world, there are rich get richer effects in social media. One consistent idea is that a lot of what becomes successful is luck. There's a great book, Duncan Watts, sociologist, mathematician turned sociologist, wrote a called Everything is Obvious Once You Know the Answer. In that book argues that a lot of attention in the world is really self-referential. Something gets attention, and then because it already is somewhat popular, becomes more popular and more popular. And that's one explanation for why there's a sort of huge distribution that just like most people do very little in a given community, most communities, most subreddits are very small. They will have one or two comments a month, while there's kind of a big middle, but then it's a really steep drop off and then a long tail where there are a few subreddits that have hundreds of thousands, millions of comments per month. And so attention works sort of like this. And one explanation for that is this rich get richer effect. Initially, things are about equal, and for whatever reason, including luck, some things become a little more popular. They therefore get a little more exposure and become even more popular. One approach, and again, this is not based in much else other than intuition, is that you might try different things. That if YouTube starts working out and you can sort of build a following, it's actually more important where you have a following, my guess is, than it would be what the algorithms that are being used on that site, whether they align particularly. So if you have some skills that make you think that you'd be good at YouTube or good at Reddit or good at Facebook or whatever, or even an initial small following that you think you could leverage, often that initial kind of bootstrap can build critical mass and put you into kind of a positive feedback loop.
Okay, and another thing that I might say as a takeaway from what you just described is if the rich get richer, maybe it's helpful to piggyback on an already popular trend. Liz's group, which is promoting empowered women, so she's got a region. There's obviously a lot of people in Chicago, a lot of women in Chicago. Empowered women, kind of brings in like a feminist, female empowerment theme, which is appealing. And it's almost like she latched her business onto some already very popular trends. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but I imagine that women are pretty active users compared to men on Facebook. And so there's a few things incorporated there. Rather than trying to start a trend, she associated herself with it.
Yeah, I think that makes intuitive sense to me. I think that's often a good approach.
Okay. And so like, say like the subreddits, like you don't necessarily have to say like, oh, that subreddit already exists. You're like, well, that popular subreddit means that there's opportunity. Okay. That's very helpful. Now, I don't know if you're working at the science level, but do you have any observations or any thoughts on companies that are trying to create community, and are there any common mistakes or common, you've touched on this a little bit, like, like the sincerity versus the being fake, but is there anything that comes to mind that is just like, um, just doesn't work when a company tries this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, at least in most online communities, people don't want to feel like people often want community identity, a group identity, and that's often there are exceptions to this, but that's often independent of the brand. Even if you are, part of r/Apple, which is, I think that's what it's called. I'm actually, some community that's on Reddit that is centered around a product. The expectation is that it is not people who work at the company who run the subreddit. You don't come there for information from the company. You come to talk about the product that you love or hate or whatever. And so I think heavy-handedness is like letting, maybe that's a good approach, is like if you're big enough that there are conversations about your brand or communities about your brand, then listening is probably the best thing you can learn from them. Identifying trends, identifying issues, etc., is probably the best thing. Like uh, driving the conversation is probably difficult and may backfire more often than it's helpful.
You know, I'll just share an example as you're talking that came to mind that, so I used to live in Austin and I'd come into the Austin airport. I never actually went to these events, but I was aware of this maybe annual event that was being hosted in Austin by Red Bull. It was this like flug tag thing. I think that's what it was called, but people would construct flying machines that didn't
Oh,
fly,
yeah,
and
I've
they'd
seen
like,
videos of
have
this.
have you seen this?
Yeah.
And they'd like push them off a high dive, and they'd basically it was, but there'd be like thousands of people in watching this, and like inextricably linked to Red Bull, the drink, the energy drink, and um, I mean, it's like very fascinating videos to watch, and you can't avoid it. Um, how would you rate that as like a community building exercise? And like, is that the same thing? You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Is that just totally a different category?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the same in that sense. So one of the things that we've found about how people think about online communities is that they don't have dyadic relationships generally. Meaning like it's not, they aren't there to hang out with their friends. And it's like, here's my
Mm.
friend, person X and person Y, and I know they're in this room and we hang out together and talk. Even in quite small communities. So we interviewed people who participated in quite small Reddits, 100 or 500 active people that participated. Even there, it was really more about like, these are my people. This is my group. I am like these people. And so that's why people join and participate in them, because it's sort of a group identity. And so in that sense, I think the Red Bull, having a brand identity, I think Duolingo, the language learning app, also does it. It's like something that's memorable, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, that's like my people. I get that. I think that can be useful. I mean, obviously also has the potential to backfire. I'm sure that Duolingo is off-putting to some people, but maybe that's memorableness is worth it. I think it could build community. I'm sure there's a community on Reddit about Duolingo and kind of the crazy things that they do as a brand, and the people talking about it. It gets engagement in that way.
Okay, so if you were thinking through now level of like effort required of a community participant, um, so like for instance, if you had a forum that required a lot of reading, like very lengthy reading, um, like understand and participate, um, I guess the balance is usually like the more in upfront investment to be able to participate, like the more I'm likely to come back tomorrow and the next day. Like if I've got some skin in the game. And then like, say like the Red Bull situation, those guys like actually constructed a vehicle that was, like they put some effort into it, they put a few weekends in. What would you say is like the balance or the equation between effort and engagement required of the participant?
This is a fantastic question, Reed. I think that the lesson here is that even low barriers online can be big barriers. In general, there's sort of, if you know the 80-20 rule from lots of different things, 80% of the problems come from 20% of the customers or whatever it is. Online, that's even more skewed. I've talked about this a little bit, but 90% of people on a given subreddit or whatever are lurkers. They will never, ever post anything. The 9% will post something like once in a while, and 1% are sort of the power users. And so giving ways for people to participate, very low effort, is really important. I mean, depending on the context, like whether or not it makes sense to, whether it always works this way, but it's typically you want a pathway for people to move from the lurker to the semi-engaged person to the power user, and cutting off people at any point is risky. And so I think that the idea of like paywalls try and capture this a little bit, right? That you get so many reads for free, and that captures all of the lurkers who are only going to read one article anyway, and they still at least see your ads, or you get a little bit of benefit from them. But the power users, they're willing to pay. They really want your content, and so figuring out how to I think maybe the principle as well, and again, it's hard to measure this empirically, but there's some empirical and theoretical work that shows that there are people that move from sort of the lurker into the power user. And in many cases, you have to sort of learn. You're learning about the community. You lurk because you're kind of figuring things out. And so giving a way for people to do that is I think, really important. There's one other thing. I can't remember what I was thinking, but if it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
No, that's fine. And do you think a community, so there are very low barrier to entry options where businesses may think they're community building, like they're engaging in this activity. And so that would be the instance of creating a social media profile, a free social media profile, that all it requires is somebody to have the right URL or to click follow or like. And they want engagement. They'll post content like, and they hope for comments and likes on their own posts. Is that community, or is that like, I mean, is that even like, can you even get a following? Like, are the platforms going to allow that, or does it have to be sectioned off as like, I've got this LinkedIn group, I've got this Facebook group, or this subreddit? Like, does that make sense?
Yes, it definitely does make sense. There is a gray area, both. I mean, at least academically, people think it like, what is the line around what counts as an online community? So some people have argued, for example, that Black Twitter is a community. It's kind of the same people. They're hashtags that sort of organize it. And the lines are just fuzzier. The lines always, and maybe this is one of the how useful this is for sales folks, but the lines around any community, this is sort of a defining feature. The lines around membership are really fluid. If you ask who are the employees of a company, you can come up with a list, and that list would be agreed to by most people who work at the company. Who are the members of a subreddit is just like, do we count the people who are here every day but they never comment? Do you have to say so many things? And so it's really fluid. People are moving in and out, and so both within even those more well-defined communities, it's hard to say who's in and who's out, and then whether or not something else counts as a community. In some important ways, I think it does. I think that there's this other idea. Again, I don't know how useful it is for sales, but that now I've forgotten the name of it. Basically, that people build a fake relationship with kind of, especially internet. If you think about influencers, many of them sort of intentionally promote this idea that they are your friend, even though it's kind of a one-way friendship. And so there is community. Like, these are people who feel like they have a relationship with people. And so in that sense, it's community. There's identity that's connected to it. Like, I think those are, and then identity is really motivating. Yeah. I need to look that up. Reed, what is the name of this
Not to,
concept? All right.
and it's fine.
No, it's bugging me now. I have a student who's like writing a paper about it, and it's just escaped me.
Well, maybe while you're thinking, I mean, you're raising so many interesting points, and it's just like my brain is spinning. I Okay, so first of all, let me ask, do you think societally, and let's just keep it to like the US, are people craving more communities to be a part of, deeper engagements with the community, or are they kind of treasuring like independence and kind of like more casual relationships where they kind of drop in and out, like the lurker style? Like, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so we should definitely be asking sociologists about this,
Okay,
or
sure.
demographers or
Yeah,
something like that. But yeah, so
yeah.
there's a famous book that's, I mean, it's got to be 20-ish years old now, called Bowling Alone. Maybe it must be even older than that. But Robert Putnam is this famous sociologist who looked at the decline of things like bowling leagues, things where people are kind of together, doing things together, and has argued that we have been losing social capital. There is some research, again, far afield from mine. I only know about it tangentially, but that shows that people have fewer close friends now than they did, that they spend less time with their friends. I think that people want friendship, they want connection, and I think there's increasing evidence that online communities, they can be helpful. They can be very helpful. I think there have been lots of benefits, but they don't produce that kind of deep connection, and that they may in fact substitute for it in ways that people don't like in the end and are not happy about.
Interesting. Well, totally disregard this, business marketers. Heard was community, community, community. Go for it. But okay. So another, keep looking for that. But another big topic of this podcast that inevitably comes up is AI, and obviously AI affects these online communities tremendously. It affects marketers tremendously, and so we're all using it. We're all experimenting with it. We're all kind of watching to see what's next and how it's going to affect our employment or how we interact with information. I have used AI to generate content over the last few years, and the quality has increased tremendously. And in some cases, it's totally indiscernible from very high quality human generated content. And so, content generation is a part of community building. You're promoting opinions or thoughts. And then there's also AI has the ability to converse and interact. Do you think the fact that technology exists and we know it's in our forums, we know it's hitting us in many directions, how is that going to affect community building in the future?
Yeah, great question. So I found the term parasocial.
Okay.
I don't know how you'll splice this in. Diana, if you ever see this, my student I'm working with, I'm sorry for forgetting. Anyway, to go back to the question of AI, I go back and forth about what's going to happen. I think there's some catastrophic type outcomes, like not catastrophic in the big C, catastrophic for Reddit, for example. I mean, there is already a crazy amount of AI generated content. As I look around at Reddit, and maybe the flip side is just knowing how good AI is makes people incredulous about everything. And
Mm.
so, every post that's up, people are now investigating, like, is this AI? I don't know if it is, the comments as well. Like, it's easy to kind of just accuse someone or something of being AI. And I think that is going to be a big problem because, one of the things people come for is authenticity, is expertise. And if you can't trust that you're getting either of those things from a community, then maybe why don't you just ask yourself? Like, I didn't come to Reddit just to get answers. I could do that. And so I think I think it's dangerous for communities, and I don't know what the final state is going to be. There are some markers now. For example, one of the nice things about the transparency of online communities like Reddit or Facebook is that you can sort of see someone's history. You can look at what they've done in the past,
Oh,
and there's some mark, right, that
okay.
this is not someone who posts every 5 minutes across 500 different types. It's not a bot, and so there's some things like that. But even those are not foolproof, and so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I think a lot of people, I've used Reddit, and I think whenever I see a post that looked a little bit business promotional, I would go in their history and see like, is this something they're posting to 50 different Reddits? And so like it just adds like another dimension that we want to check the history and see like, is this person getting flagged for generating fake content? And I mean, I think clearly the quality is going to continue to improve, and But I mean, maybe just speculating, maybe that does drive people to more back to the bowling leagues, back to the face-to-face events, or church or community meetings, things like that. Who knows? That's kind of daunting.
Yes, that's the hope, is that we'll figure it out. And, I'm an undying optimist. I just can't help myself. I think that we will figure some things out, but at least in the near term, it's hard to think of. I think AI is amazing. I think it does many things that are great. It's hard to think of ways that it's going to be a net positive for online communities.
Interesting. Okay, so we'll wrap here, but I would like to just ask one final question. Considering the potential of AI to really disrupt a lot of what we know about communities, do you think that this is a worthwhile activity for a business to build a community for the purpose of a business to grow? Do you think that is a worthwhile activity, worth the effort potentially?
Yeah. I mean, again, as someone that knows almost nothing about it, there's lots of the sides of the costs and things like that I just that I'm not sure. But yes, I mean, I think people talk online about the products and services that they use, and at least knowing where those conversations are happening, being a part of them when appropriate, I think is valuable. I think, and so, I mean, maybe that's the part where it says at least be a lurker, at least observe. I think it's really low cost and easy. In fact, there are lots of tools that you can set up that will help you do keyword searches across lots of social media, etc. And I think that it's a great, easy, cheap way to listen to customers or your competitors' customers or whatever, right? I think that being involved in communities is great. Whether and in which ways it makes sense to post or to create your own communities, I think it's a little fuzzier. I think it's always a good idea to listen, and it's easier to listen and to learn than you probably think. I think it's easy to mess up and create bad outcomes when you're trying to manage things. I think that, I mean, maybe the one exception is that if you have the bandwidth to do it, something like an explicit community for a help community, for example. It seems like that's almost always great. People know what they're getting. They know where to go for it. But if you are sort of kind of subtly, you start I don't know, let's say you're selling beans and you start a subreddit about pinto beans and you're subtly trying to control the conversation and remove everything from your competitors, I think that is more likely to backfire than to be helpful.
Okay. That is great insight. And I mean, you pointed out something that we probably should have been discussing all along, is the listening in the community and, using that data to incorporate in your product or your service. No, that's tremendous. Well, Jeremy, where can people, if they'd like to learn more about your research and, places to find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I studied social media. I'm on them. I have a website, jeremydfoote.com. I'm on maybe Blue Sky the most these days, but I don't know. I'm an academic. What I really want is people to cite my papers. But no, I mean, yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, I'd be happy to talk.
Well, wonderful. Well, I will, we'll look forward to following your research. I think you've summed up some tremendous insights for business marketers. And I learned a lot today. So thank you very much for joining.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.